about how we couldn't stop even if we wanted to. I mean, we can't stop the mission of the humanities. We're sponsoring it, the Institute of the Humanities and Global Cultures, but we're not making it. We couldn't stop it even if we tried growing up. I'm just not sure how that happens. Only yesterday I was chewing gum, whistling to the Beatles, panting to turn 21. I wanted it so much, the growing up, the maturing, the getting sophisticated. And now, after all these years, I don't think I've even come close. It was my favorite evening a year ago. A passel of brave undergraduates coming out to talk in public on being human. Already I can see this one becoming the new favorite because I know things about these college kids. I see how they live, how they don't just throttle forward. They think while they throttle. They grow up, they get taller, but they also grow inside the head where consciousness lives. May I mention Kierkegaard, that glowing Danish genius who wrote, "It's perfectly true, as philosophers say, that life must be understood backwards. But they forget the other proposition, that it must be lived forward." And then he goes on, because that's what Kierkegaard does. He goes gloriously on. He says, "Life can never really be understood in time, simply because at no particular moment can I find the necessary resting place from which to understand it backwards." So they have their work cut out for them this evening, these eight. It's very private, after all, this growing and going. No two stalks rise in the same way. But it's also something that we find we can't keep ourselves from looking at. Growth and change. Tales of coming of age will never lose their fascination. It's as if we stare at one another's changes because we want to find out how to do it ourselves. I'll name them, all 8 of our speakers, in the order in which they'll speak. I'll give their majors and their titles, but not a word else, because what they're going to say tonight will put any description of mine to shame. They're going to speak with the vivacity of honesty, and I honor them for it. Our first speaker will be Jackson Wolfer in anthropology. His talk is called "Growing Up as a Rite of Passage." The second will be Ida Herzog-Ditto, who majors in political and social thought, and will talk on nostalgia. Faith Lyons will speak third, and although her major is undecided, her title is certain. It's the archetypical human journey. Alex Lichtenstein will speak fourth. She's in politics and religious studies. Her subject is what I want to be when I grow up. Taylor Garrison, from the English major, will speak on finding the wonder. Evie Kling, also in English, has this as her title. It's right, natural, wonderful, it's good. Sandra Menendez, in English, will speak on the sidekick. And last, Eric McDaniel, so important to the organization of the event this evening, will speak on David Foster Wallace, Forever Overhead. So you too, you audience, be grown up and welcome these audacious individuals with a warmth that puts the cold out there to shame.
So they say generally to write about what you know. Obviously, they have never been a 21-year-old college student who's supposed to talk about growing up. Seriously, I live in an apartment filled with Pokemon cards, a larger-than-life-size cardboard cutout of Ronald Reagan, and a synthesizer I bought from a stranger behind a bank 3 days ago. Speaking of 3 days ago, it was about 3 days ago, Actually, right after I was done expecting the anonymous electronic music enthusiast I bought my synthesizer from to shank me in the barracks party, then I realized, crap, I really do have to give this talk about growing up, and given my current situation, I think I'm woefully unqualified. But being a resourceful student of no small research skills, I did what anyone in my situation would do. I went on Google. Growing up. Enter. The first result was illuminating. It was kidshealth.org. And the article that came up was called Puberty and Growing Up. It featured helpful advice for kids on some key issues. These issues include things like boy stuff, girl stuff, school stuff. There's a big jump coming up here. Drugs, alcohol, and smoking. Tough topics. And most ominously, body stuff. Against my better judgment, I clicked on some of these links. It became very quickly apparent that this growing up thing is some sort of nightmarish hellscape. Acne, drug abuse, and changing parts. But what caught my eye most of all was an article called, I'm Growing Up, but Am I Normal? This seemed like a pretty relevant thing to ask myself as I stared at the Children's Health website I was looking at while riffing on my new black market synthesizer. The article began, since your last birthday, a lot of things have changed. Well, check! Most imperatively, I can buy alcohol now, and Miley Cyrus is somehow relevant again. It continued. For one, you're much smarter than you were last year. This is obvious. Is it really website? I don't think the fact that I'm reading you says something to the contrary. But it went on. All right, so it says there might have been some other changes, ones that you weren't ready for. And now you're looking in the mirror, thinking only one thing. Am I normal? Well, sheesh, now I have a website. What's wrong with you? This is about the time I closed down the website, opened up a word processor, started writing this speech because I had an idea. And now that I've captivated you with my black market synthesizer antics, I'm going to force you all to listen to it. All right? So how many of you all know like the term rite of passage, right? You've heard rite of passage before. I assume that's like a thing people have heard. All right, cool. Does anyone know what it is? Can anyone describe a rite of passage? Like anyone want to raise their hand or something like that? I can describe it if anyone wants to. All right. So academics will usually say that rites of passage are constructed in three parts. First, you begin in one stage. For example, you're a child. Let's say you're going to begin as a child. That's stage one. Then on the far end of the rite of passage, right, you become a grown-up, right? So you started as a child and you end as a grown-up. In the middle, there's this really fuzzy space. This space where you're going to transform from one into the other, from a child into a grown-up. And in the process of transforming, you're not a child anymore, right? And you're not quite a grown-up. You're, as they say, betwixt and between the two categories. You can actually use this model to look at all sorts of things. You can look at, one example that's helpful is the boot camp in the military, right? You move from a civilian to a soldier. But in between, there's this whole period where you're not really either quite yet. So in anthropology, which is again what I study and where this model comes from, they call this in-between space the liminal space because they need fancy words to describe simple things, right? So people in a liminal space usually have some particular characteristics. For example, they're no longer in their old category. They're not children anymore, right? Or they're not civilians anymore. But they haven't quite moved into their new one yet. So they're often kind of ground down to be these basic uniform human beings. They're not individuals. And again, the example of boot camp is a really good one. Look at the recruits. You cut your hair, your clothing choice gets removed. Everything is done to make you completely indistinguishable from the next guy or girl. There are lots of other examples too. If you think about it, it's a really rich field of inquiry. But there's this other thing that happens. And in fact, this in-between space, the space between categories, it always feels just a little bit scary. All right? Our brains are organizationally obsessed little neat freaks. They like to pack the world away into comfy categories. That animal has wings, says your brain, so it is a bird. That animal has fur, says your brain, so it is a mammal. And then your brain sees a bat and it flips the heck out. Because a bat messes with your categories, your understandings of the world. It's the same thing with like a werewolf. Is it a wolf or is it a person? or a zombie? Is it alive or is it dead? The things we fear oftentimes blur boundaries, and that's one of the many anthropological explanations for how fear works. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering, Jackson, but what does any of this have to do with growing up? And my first response would be, how do you know my name? My second response would be that I'm about to tell you. You see, it all comes back to the question of that silly website. I'm growing up, but am I normal? The whole mission of the website is to warn kids of the dangers of growing up. Your body will change, your friends will change, bullies will appear, drugs will somehow get thrown at you all of a sudden, and you should be freaking out about this. If this weren't worth freaking out about, they wouldn't have a whole website to stop you from freaking out about it. And you know what you should be worried most about? Being normal. You're changing, so of course you have to care about being normal. It's the most important thing. But is it actually of course? Why do the physical changes have to mean fear and terror and all of those things that we associate with growing up? My argument is actually that it's because we use the physical changes, the biological changes, to mark where you start moving into this terrible realm of adolescence, this liminal phase, this transitional place between being a kid and being a grown-up. As a teenager, you're not quite a grown-up, and you're not quite a kid. As a consequence, society doesn't quite know what to do with you. Businesses don't want you loitering around their property. It's assumed you're up to no good. You're supposed to start being able to have a job and take care of yourself. But you're also still supposed to do everything your parents tell you. Finally, our ideal understanding of growing up includes exiling the adolescents from the real world for 4 years somewhere that they can all hang out with their own kind, a place we call college. Just like a boot camp, you get cut off from the rest of the world, stuck in this special place. And when you emerge, you are suddenly this brand new kind of person. You emerge from college a grown-up. Nobody tells you how it happens, but bam, there it is. Have you graduated? You're a grown-up, all right? And what's more, since people in liminal spaces sort of get ground down into non-individuals, in this adolescent phase, between child and grown-up, you're supposed to have all these questions about who you are, to figure out things like your sexuality. What is my real sexuality? What are my interests? To rebuild yourself into the real-world grown-up that you're going to become at the end of this process. And we convince ourselves very, very, very thoroughly that this growing up business is something to be worried about. The ground floor of that worry, the thing that makes it all happen, is that we think we're on a journey from one stage, child, to another, grown-up. There comes to be an end goal. And with that end goal comes a sort of pressure to reach it, because, let's be honest, the adolescents get a pretty bad rap in terms of society's views. Teenagers want to get out. They want to escape to the exiled land of college. And when they get there, the pressure doesn't stop. Everything is devoted towards getting them to complete the rite of passage and finish their transformation into a grown-up by graduate. I think it's pretty fair to say, maybe you'll disagree, but I think it's pretty fair to say that this is how we structure the idea of growing up in our heads as a rite of passage. But the thing about rites of passage is that they require, passage, movement from one category to another. It's easy to think like this. Our brains are organizationally obsessed little neat freaks that like to pack the world away into comfy categories, right? Obviously, we're moving from children to grown-ups. Each one of us. I mean, our parents are grown-ups. Professor Levinson, who introduced us all, he's a grown-up, right? This whole system, though, it breaks down when you try to actually define the categories. When do you stop being a child? Our laws can't decide. You can get drafted and smoke at 18. You can have sex at 16. You can't drink until you're 21, and you can't drive at some ambiguous age between, all of those numbers, depending on the state. You can't be president unless you're 35, a senator unless you're 30, or a representative unless you're, 25, and I haven't really seen any difference in maturity between the positions. Where's the cutoff? Where's the line that says, I am a grown-up? I think it's nowhere, because no one is ever grown up. That implies that you stop, that one day you sort of hit a sort of pressure release valve of grown-upness, and all of a sudden, bam, now you watch C-SPAN and talk in the front of the car while the little people sit in the back seat. Saying someone is grown up acts as if we ever really stop growing up. And that's just not true. The idea might work better with a neat little system of child and grown-up that we have in our heads, but it just doesn't make sense if we can't really figure out when someone finally is a grown-up. So they say to write about what you know, right? And at some point I realized that what I know is that I'm not a grown-up. I'm not sure anyone really is, not even you, Professor Levinson. There are no preset categories. There is no special stage when you become a grown-up. There is only you and learning and changing at whatever speed you learn and change. For me, that's slowly. That's why this isn't a talk on being grown up. It's on growing up. Because that's all we can really hope for. Well, that and to not be stabbed by shady black market synthesizer dealers who only accept cash and do business at night behind the Bank of America.
For not having the potential to make you laugh quite as much as Jackson did. In high school, I was kind of endlessly ridiculed for not knowing how to hit a punchline, so we're not even going to bother trying there. So I was thinking a lot about childhood and I guess these same stages that Jackson was talking about, you know, how you move through from like little kid to kind of ambiguous teenager to even more ambiguous college student, and then I don't really know what happens after that, but I am lucky enough right now to spend 3 hours a week with an 8-year-old every week and 3 hours a week in a high school, so I'm kind of bombarded with all of those age ranges every week, and my latest obsession has been pre-K. And there's this article in the New York Times about a month ago about the language gap. And essentially what it said is that the opportunity gap has already been created by the time we enter kindergarten. So children from affluent households hear 30 million more words by the time they're 3 than children from low-income households, which means that their lexicons are considerably bigger. So when they enter kindergarten, they have a much easier time. So by the time they're in 3rd grade, their reading comprehension levels are substantially more advanced. So what this means is the starting line is rarely equal. I don't even really know anymore what the starting line even is. And the reason I mention this is when I think about growing up, I think about nostalgia. When I was in middle school and high school, I was deeply nostalgic all the time. I really, really hated the idea of growing up as a child. Peter Pan was my favorite movie when I was a small child. The Lost Boys really resonated with me. And then I hit middle school and the growing up process had started and the nostalgia had really taken hold. So The Outsiders was my book of choice and Robert Frost was my favorite poet. Nothing Gold Can Stay was really hit home for me at that point in life. So I think I've always had this idea that children have it all because they have endless possibilities. Nothing's been decided. Everything's yet to be determined for children. And I think what I've come to realize since I made it to college, and even in the process of choosing a college, is that childhood is not something that I can put on a pedestal. And also that the possibilities don't really disappear. Since high school, I always kind of imagined that I would end up at a small Northeast liberal arts college. And when I was in 12th grade, I decided that I didn't want that. So I derailed once when I decided to come down here. And then when I came here, I almost immediately declared a physics major. And now I'm doing political and social thought. So I derailed once again. And at times that's made me feel a little out of control, but other days it makes me feel like I'm in control. So today I was out in Keswick and I was working with an 8-year-old. And he's a great kid. He keeps me going a lot of the time. I look at him and I think about all of the yet-to-be determines in his life. And that makes me really hopeful. But he's also one of those kids who started out well behind at the starting line. And normally we have our difficulties. We have face contorted, and he started making this guttural sound, and he just shut down completely. And I don't know if he could hear anything, I don't know if he could see anything. He was just gone. And I realized that there were days when I was a child that weren't super fun and golden and shiny and new. Days where I felt really lost and alone. So I think what I've come to realize is that life has its ups and downs throughout, and that you don't start out shiny and new and then get kind of progressively ruined as you move through your years. There will be those moments where you feel lost and hopeless at the beginning, and those moments will string through to the end. But to make this not be an entirely bleak, depressing speech, which I know it's kind of shaping up to be, I think what I've realized is looking at this whole question of the language gap and, you know, how do we prevent kids from falling behind before they even start kindergarten? Yes, we need to fund pre-K. That's what this whole kind of New York Times article is about. We need to give public funding to pre-Ks. That's true, but it's not suggesting that we pull the funding after that we assess kids at kindergarten and say, you're already behind, you can stop now. So I think the hopeful message behind all of this is that yes, it's not shiny and new and easy at any point because the starting line is before we can even remember it. But it also doesn't end. It doesn't root itself so deeply in a path that we can't rewrite it. So don't assume that you're stuck. Don't assume that there's no way to change the path you're on, the conversation you're having, the way you see the world. Because I went from being a physics major in love with my methodical problem sets where I can move from my variables to my solutions to being a political and social thought major where I have to sit down and write every week, which terrifies me every week. But it's also given me a really great chance to explore. So if you're tempted to rewrite that path, to rewrite that story, it's never too late. So I don't really know where I'm going after college, what happens after college. I don't even really know what happens in college, to be totally honest. But I also know that the possibilities haven't ended.
I'm the first one experimenting with technology, so if it doesn't work, let's go with it. My senior year of high school, I enrolled in an English elective called Myths and Motifs. I'll be honest, my decision to take this class had very little to do with the burning desire to study the archetypes that form the basis of Western literature, and more to do with the person teaching the class, like most high schoolers. So, as I spent the semester delving into Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth, all 3 books in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and applying my newfound knowledge to epic films like Star Wars and The Matrix, I spent more time questioning why I hadn't experienced a life-changing call to adventure instead of admiring the beauty of literature. You could chalk it up to a year-long exercise in self-awareness, facilitated by the college application process, or perhaps a desire to hurry along this journey, also known as growing up, and to enter the final stage, crossing the return threshold, and existing as master of my 2 worlds. Let's go with it. I don't know, whatever. It's hard to miss the fact that children are growing up faster and faster. You'd have to actually never turn on the television to miss the stories about 6-year-olds wearing belly shirts and the perils of being a 10-year-old without an iPhone. In fact, it's almost become a cliche. But as I sat, attempting to culminate my experience in Myths and Motifs, I began to wonder if growing up is the same thing as maturing? And if they are different, does the archetypical framework authors like Campbell use lead to growing physically older, or to a sense of spiritual and emotional understanding? If Campbell was formulating a way in which us mere adolescents could mature, at what stage in his extensively detailed, step-by-step process did one embody maturity? And what would Campbell have to say about the belly shirt-wearing, iPhone-carrying, selfie-taking 6-year-old? And if I hadn't gotten this call to adventure by age 18, what had I achieved? Had I simply gotten older all these years? Or was I forgetting all those times I followed white-haired wizards through Middle-earth in an attempt to restore the balance of good and evil? In the race to reach the pinnacle of maturity, why was I so terribly far behind my peers? I don't have an answer to any of these questions. I didn't then and I don't now. But what I do know is I spent a lot of the first 18 years of my life reading. I read in the car. I read during recess. I often broke my bedtime to read. Rebel, I know. One time, I even volunteered to go to my little brother's baseball tournament in Sussex, Delaware, because it guaranteed hours of uninterrupted reading. I voraciously consumed everything, from all 7 Harry Potter novels to Anne of Green Gables to The Brothers Karamazov. I fell in love with the magic of Jay Gatsby, right along with Daisy, explored the allure of rugged individualism with Christopher McCandless, and realized the pain inherent in deep loss and in accepting personal responsibility with Jean in a separate piece. As my friends, these fictional characters encountered problems that I was not capable of facing. In following their journeys, I like to believe that I grew. I matured. As a society, we ponder the usefulness of literature, just about as often as we contemplate the perils of our ever-aging 6-year-olds. Many pragmatists question, how could one learn anything from the trials and tribulations of Scarlett O'Hara? But I stand here as a living example of how fictional characters affect our youth. Books are not just houses for words. They hold opportunities to discover things about ourselves that we cannot within the walls that are our reality. They present opportunities to explore our minds, to challenge ourselves, and to learn things about the world we may never encounter in our home cities or towns. As early as first grade, we're introduced to elements of a story: plot, character, conflict, setting, rising action, climax, falling action. And my senior year, I got to delve deeper into what makes a story by learning about what it means to be a threshold guardian, to receive a call to adventure, and to end a story as a master of 2 worlds. Now, whether or not any of you have heard any of these terms, I promise you that if you've ever read a book, which clearly all of you have by being at UVA, that you've experienced them. And those terms, those structural guidelines that define the literature we grew up with, guide our lives as well. My own call to adventure might not have included a white-haired wizard, although if you've ever seen my senior year English teacher, he's a scary likeness to Gandalf. In my final few thoughts, I'd like to challenge this notion that we all hold, that by age 20, upon entering our 3rd decade, we should be grown up. If you look at the detailed chart behind me that most first graders could recite by heart, you'll notice that the period of time spent in the beginning and the rising action phases of the story are much longer than the falling action or the denouement. I'd like to ask you a question. How boring would Harry Potter have been if only 1/4 of the story had been Harry growing up? And the rest of the story, the other 3/4, in this case, 5 1/4 books, had detailed Harry's life as a grown-up. Yes. I can promise you, 7th grade Faith would have stopped reading if there had been no action in book 5. The amazing part of growing up is that it's hard to define the end destination. Just like in books, how we get to follow along with our character friends as they battle both personal and physical struggles, inwardly and externally, with friends and alone, our lives are continuous exercises in growing up. And again, like books, just as when the novel ends and the words detailing a character's life run out, and most times the character does not perish, so too does our own personal adventure continue from challenge to challenge. Just as we are able to pick up another book after we finish one, we can also choose another path if we grow in a way we don't like. While I'm still pretty sure that I haven't encountered a white wizard with a task that only I can accomplish, I'm beginning to realize that, like my storybook friends, I'm on my very own hero's journey, and that the little moments I've mistaken for ordinary events are comparable to their threshold experiences. I've been met with mentors along the way. I've experienced the road of trials. And one day, far, 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 far from now, I will be the master of two worlds, having completed the journey that is growing up. Oh, yeah, sorry.
So before I start talking at you guys for several minutes, I want you all to take a moment and think of your answer to that question that was inescapable throughout our childhoods. What do you want to be when you grow up? When you imagined yourself in 10, 20, 30 years, so basically when you got old, what did you see? And now that we're all here together, 10, 20, 30 years later, if you met 8-year-old you today and told her your career plans and ambitions, would she be disappointed in you? According to a recent survey, 2 out of every 5 people don't feel like they've fulfilled their childhood ambitions for adult life. Think about that. 40% of people, which means that even as a humanities major who's horrible at statistics, I can tell you that means some of you in this room probably fall into that category. I can tell you that I, at least, fall into that category. From ages 2 to 11, I wanted nothing but to be the President of the United States, for a variety of totally legitimate reasons. First of all, he had a bowling alley and a movie theater in his house, which was pretty much the pinnacle of cool. Plus, he got to ride in limos all day, which was great because I thought driving seemed kind of scary. And then, of course, there was the matter of having his own plane. You just really can't top that. So, I was going to be president. I told everyone I met, with the confidence that only a little kid can have, that they would see me in the White House one day. I had already started drafting my campaign platform. It's going to be smooth sailing to Liechtenstein 2028. But today, if you ask me what I want to be when I grow up, I wouldn't say president. Something's changed. And I wondered what exactly that was. Was it the world? Was it me? Was it the looming shadow of Hillary Clinton? What is it that makes us give up our childhood dreams? I think that there are 3 reasons we end up in jobs that are completely different than we dreamt of being when we were kids. The first is easy. It's the dreams that are literally physically impossible. I'm sorry if I have to be the one to break this to you, but no matter how much you believe in yourself and how hard you work, you're never going to grow up to be a fire truck, or Spider-Man, or a unicorn. These dreams are fairly easy to give up, and we tend to move on pretty quickly once we realize that they are, in fact, literally impossible. The second is a product of our development as we grow up. Our interests change, and what once seemed like the coolest thing in the world now seems like a horrible way to spend our time. Every little girl may go through a ballerina stage, but when those girls get a little older, many of them discover that they actually hate ballet, or that it's a fun hobby, but not what they want to devote their life to, or that they just can't stand to wear tutus. Whatever the reason, sometimes we just grow out of our dreams, and it's okay to move on and follow our new passions. It's the last reason, though, that's the most dangerous, and the one I'm willing to bet claims the most childhood dreams. It's fear, pure and simple. We're scared of how grand and unrealistic and unreachable our dreams seem. It seems almost silly that we ever thought we could achieve something so monumental and unique. Besides, that's not what adults do. Adults don't eat ice cream for every meal just because they can. Adults are responsible and stable, and they pick jobs that pay well and have good benefits. Right? I gave up on my dream of being the president not because it was impossible and not because I lost interest. Hey, I'm still a policy major and a government no. I gave up on it because it was scary and idealistic and all the things it seems like we're supposed to give up on once we reach that so-called real world. The older I got, the more overwhelming it seemed to hold the fate of the free world in my hands. The sheer number of people, smart, talented people, who dream of being president and fail, intimidated me. I decided that I still wanted to work in government, but I wouldn't aim quite so high. I would scale back on my dreams. I would be realistic. But the more I think about it, the more I think that this isn't really a reason at all. It's an excuse. It protects us from the obstacles, the risk of failure that comes from chasing after a big, almost unattainable dream. But fear of failure doesn't protect us. It confines us. It keeps us from reaching the heights that each of us is capable of. It leaves us with regrets. Now, please don't take this as me telling you that if you just quit everything and follow your dreams, everything's going to turn out great. I can't promise that. The risk of failure wouldn't be scary if failure weren't a very real, even a likely possibility. And it never hurts to have job security or a 401k. But what I am saying is that growing up doesn't necessarily have to mean giving up. Don't settle for a job you don't like or you don't care about just because it seems like the best possible option. Redefine possible. Push your limits.